I didn't know my life could fracture so quietly. There was no screaming match, no shattered glass, no dramatic moment where everything finally exploded. It happened while I was already on my knees. I was 32 years old, hollowed out by grief, barely functional, and failing, to survive the weeks after my older brother died. The kind of grief that doesn't arrive in waves, but in fog. The kind that wraps around your chest so tightly you forget how breathing is supposed to feel. The kind that makes time blur until days lose their names. And that's when my husband cheated on me. Not before the diagnosis, not after I healed, not when life was stable or gentle. He cheated while I was grieving. I didn't find out from him. I found out from my brother's best friend. Someone who hesitated before speaking. Someone whose voice shook, not with guilt, but with dread. And in that moment, standing in my own kitchen, holding my phone with hands that felt disconnected from my body, I realized something terrifying. Grief hadn't just broken me, it had exposed everything around me, including the man I married. I remember staring at the photo on my screen, my mind refusing to accept what my eyes were seeing. My husband, his arm around another woman, their bodies angled toward a hotel entrance like it was the most natural thing in the world. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. My body simply shut down. Because when you're already grieving someone you love with your entire soul, there's no room left for shock, no energy left for disbelief. Betrayal doesn't feel loud. It feels heavy, like something being placed on your chest that you don't have the strength to push away. I kept thinking, of all times, why now? Why while I was still waking up reaching for my brother's name? Why while my heart was still learning how to exist without him? Later, my husband would tell me I had neglected him, that my grief made him lonely, that my silence pushed him away, that he deserved happiness too. But standing there, staring at proof of his affair, all I could think was this. A loving partner doesn't compete with grief. They don't demand attention from a wound that hasn't even stopped bleeding. That was the moment I understood something that would take me years to fully accept. I wasn't losing my marriage because of my brother's death. I was losing it because the man I trusted most chose himself when I needed him most. And years later, when I thought I had finally buried that chapter of my life, I ran into him again, at a wedding, with a smile on his face, regret in his eyes, and a request that would force me to reveal the truth about the woman I had become without him. Before everything collapsed, I thought my life was solid. Not perfect, not effortless, but steady. I was 24 when I met my husband, Daniel. He was 22 then, confident in a quiet way, the kind of man who didn't need to dominate a room to be noticed. We met at a mutual friend's party during our sophomore year of college. I remember noticing him because he listened more than he spoke. While everyone else was trying to impress, he asked thoughtful questions and actually waited for the answers. I was studying communications, already juggling internships and part-time work. He was in engineering, focused, ambitious, always sketching ideas on napkins and margins of notebooks. Our first date was a mess. He forgot his wallet, spilled red wine on my dress, and apologized so profusely I almost felt bad for him. But we ended up walking around campus for hours, laughing until midnight, talking about everything from childhood fears to the kind of life we wanted someday. I fell for him slowly and then all at once. What I loved most about Daniel was his sense of direction. He knew who he was, or at least that's what I believed then. He made plans. He followed through. He talked about the future like it was something tangible, something we were building together. After graduation, we both landed jobs in the city. I started working in project coordination at a mid-sized firm. He joined an engineering company that demanded long hours but promised growth. We moved in together after a year, and for a while, life felt exactly like it was supposed to. We cooked dinner together. We argued about paint colors and laughed about it later. We hosted friends for game nights and planned trips we sometimes never took. When he proposed, it wasn't flashy. No crowd, no spectacle, just the two of us, sitting on the floor of our apartment after a long day. He handed me the ring, with hands that were shaking just a little, and said he couldn't imagine his life without me. I said yes without hesitation. Our wedding was small, intimate, warm. Family, close friends, laughter instead of perfection. My older brother, Michael, was my rock that day. He walked me down the aisle with that familiar half-smile that always made me feel safe. His speech at the reception had everyone crying, happy tears then. The first few years of marriage were good, genuinely good. We both advanced in our careers. We traveled when we could. We learned how to compromise, how to give each other space without drifting apart. I respected Daniel's independence. He respected mine, or so I thought. Then my brother got sick. Michael was everything to me. Not just my brother, my protector, my guide, the person who had steadied me through every major transition in my life. When our parents divorced, he was the one who checked in every day. When I doubted myself, he reminded me who I was. Stage 4, cancer doesn't ask permission before it destroys your world. From the moment he was diagnosed, my life narrowed. Hospital visits, late-night phone calls, sitting beside him during chemo, pretending we weren't both terrified. Daniel came with me at first. He helped. He tried. But grief doesn't move on a schedule. As weeks turned into months, Daniel started to grow restless. He missed the version of me who laughed easily, who planned dinners, who wanted to go out. I noticed the tension, but I thought it was temporary. I believed marriage meant endurance. I didn't realize that while I was losing my brother, I was also losing my husband. And I didn't see the signs, because grief made everything else blur. Looking back now, the signs were there. They didn't arrive as red flags waving wildly in the air. They came softly, like small shifts in weight that I ignored because I was already carrying so much. After Michael's diagnosis, my days revolved around hospitals and phone calls. I learned the smell of antiseptic. I learned how to read test results without flinching. I learned how to smile at my brother even when my chest felt like it was caving in. Daniel said he understood. At first, he would drive with me to appointments, sit beside me in waiting rooms, his knee bouncing as he scrolled through his phone. He helped Sarah, Michael's wife, with groceries, with meals, with watching the kids when exhaustion overwhelmed her. I told myself this was what partnership looked like under pressure. But slowly things changed. Daniel started sighing more often when I told him I needed to go to the hospital after work. He would glance at the clock, mention how tired he was, how long his day had been. Sometimes he still came with me, but his presence felt different, distracted, impatient. "You don't have to go every time," he said once, casually, as if it were a suggestion about skipping the gym. I stared at him, unsure how to respond. Michael was dying. Every visit felt like it might be the last one that mattered. "I want to be there," I said quietly. Daniel nodded, but his jaw tightened. At home, the distance grew. We stopped eating dinner together regularly. I would come home late from the hospital, emotionally wrung out, and find Daniel already on the couch, watching something loud and mindless. He didn't ask how Michael was anymore, not unless I brought it up. When I did talk, I could feel him pulling away. "You've been different," he said one night, not unkindly, but with an edge. "It feels like I don't exist anymore." The words hit me harder than I expected. I tried to explain that I was stretched thin, that grief didn't leave room for normal rhythms, that I was doing the best I could. He said he understood, but his behavior said otherwise. He began going out more without me. Drinks after work, weekends with friends. I told myself it was healthy, that he needed an outlet. I didn't want to be the wife who clung too tightly during a crisis. Still, something felt off. He guarded his phone more closely, took calls in other rooms, smiled at messages he didn't share. When I asked how his day was, his answers became vague, clipped. Meanwhile, my world was shrinking to hospital rooms and quiet drives home where I cried alone in the car so no one would see. When Michael passed away, everything inside me collapsed. I took leave from work. Some days, I barely moved. I woke up reaching for my phone to text him before remembering there was no one to text anymore. The silence was suffocating. Daniel tried, for a while. He brought me food, sat beside me, told me it would get easier, but grief doesn't respond well to timelines. After a few weeks, his patience wore thin. He wanted me to get back to normal, to go out, to socialize, to be his wife again. I wanted to breathe without pain. That gap between what I could give and what he demanded became the space where everything started to break. And while I was drowning in loss, he was already looking elsewhere for air. The day I found out, nothing felt dramatic. There was no thunder, no warning, no sense that the universe was about to tip me over the edge. It was just an ordinary afternoon. Quiet in the way grief makes everything quiet. I was sitting at the kitchen table, untouched coffee going cold beside me, when my phone buzzed. The name on the screen made my heart tighten immediately. Liam, Michael's best friend, the man who had grown up with him, the one who had stood beside me at the funeral, silent tears streaking his face as he hugged me longer than anyone else. I answered without thinking. His voice was hesitant, careful, like someone stepping onto cracked ice. "Hey, do you have a minute?" Something in his tone made my stomach drop. He didn't waste time. He didn't circle the truth. He told me he had seen Daniel earlier that day, outside a hotel downtown. He said he wouldn't have mentioned it if he wasn't sure. Said he tried to convince himself he was mistaken. Then he sent me the photo. I stared at my phone, my brain refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. Daniel, my husband. His arm around another woman's waist. Her head tilted toward him, laughing. Their bodies close, intimate in a way that left no room for doubt. I felt heat rush to my face, then drain completely. My hands went numb. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat there staring at that image like it belonged to someone else's life. Liam kept talking, apologizing, saying he didn't want to hurt me, saying he felt like he owed Michael the truth. I barely heard him. All I could think was, this can't be happening. Not now. Not like this. Not while I was still learning how to exist without my brother. When Daniel came home that evening, I didn't greet him. I waited. He set his keys down, kicked off his shoes, and asked how my day was. His voice casual, practiced. Something inside me hardened. I held up my phone. "What is this?" I asked. His face went pale. For a split second, he tried to deny it, said it wasn't what it looked like, said there was an explanation, but explanations crumble quickly when confronted with proof. Eventually, he broke. He admitted to the affair. 2 months, he said at first. Later, I would learn it had been longer. A coworker. Someone who understood him. Someone who made him feel wanted. Then came the part that shattered me completely. He said he felt lonely. He said I had been distant. He said my grief made him feel invisible. And then, without hesitation, he blamed me. "You stopped being there," he said, his voice tight. I needed something too. I remember staring at him, my chest aching in a way grief alone had never caused. My brother had just died, and my husband was telling me his affair was my fault. Something inside me snapped, not violently, but cleanly, like a rope finally giving way under too much strain. I told him to leave. He begged. He cried. He said it was a mistake. He said he still loved me. But trust, once broken during your darkest moment, doesn't regenerate. It bleeds out. And in that moment, I knew, without question, that my marriage had ended the day my grief became inconvenient to him. After I told Daniel to leave, the apartment felt impossibly large. Not empty, echoing. Every sound lingered too long. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic outside. My own breathing, uneven and unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone else. I sat on the edge of the couch, still holding my phone. The photo burned into my vision every time I blinked. I kept waiting for the emotions to explode. They didn't. Instead, everything slowed. Shock doesn't feel dramatic. It feels clinical, detached, like your body puts you in a glass box and seals it shut so you don't shatter completely. Daniel texted me from the driveway, then from the car, then from the road. "Please let me explain. I didn't mean for it to happen. You know I love you." I didn't respond. That night, I slept in fragments. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Michael's face, tired but smiling, then Daniel's hand on another woman's waist. Grief and betrayal tangled together until I couldn't tell which pain belonged to which loss. The next morning, Daniel came back. He knocked softly, like he had the right to be gentle. I let him in, not because I wanted to reconcile, but because I needed to hear the truth out loud. I needed to know exactly how much of my life had been a lie. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, hands clasped, eyes red. He apologized again, said he hated himself, said he never meant to hurt me. Then, almost reflexively, he started justifying. He talked about how lonely he felt, how I wasn't present, how the house felt cold, how grief had made me unreachable. I listened in silence, my hands folded tightly in my lap so he wouldn't see them shaking. Finally, I asked one question. "Did you ever once think about how I was surviving?" He didn't answer right away. That pause told me everything. I told him grief doesn't come with a switch, that loving someone who is dying consumes you in ways you can't explain until you live it. That marriage isn't a transaction where emotional support is withdrawn when it becomes inconvenient. He said he understood, but understanding after betrayal is hollow. I told him I was filing for divorce. His face crumpled. He begged me to reconsider, promised therapy, promised change, promised patience he had already failed to show. I felt something unexpected then, not rage, not hatred, clarity. I realized I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't being cold. I was responding to a truth I could no longer ignore. A partner who abandons you at your lowest point is not a partner you can rebuild with, no matter how much history you share. When he finally left again, I didn't cry. I sat alone and whispered Michael's name, like a prayer, like an anchor. For the first time since his death, I wasn't just grieving him. I was grieving the life I thought I had. The days after I told Daniel I was filing for divorce didn't bring relief. They brought noise. He didn't accept my decision quietly. He oscillated between remorse and accusation so fast it made my head spin. One day, he sent long messages apologizing, promising he would wait for me, that he would do whatever it took. The next day, his tone hardened, cold, defensive. "You're acting like I'm a monster," he wrote once. "You shut me out first." That sentence lodged itself in my chest like a splinter, as if grief were a choice, as if losing my brother were something I had done to him. Friends started calling, some carefully, some not. A few wanted to understand both sides. A few repeated things Daniel had said, how I had withdrawn, how he felt neglected, how marriage required effort from both people. Each conversation drained me. I realized Daniel wasn't just trying to save our marriage. He was trying to protect his narrative. In his version, he wasn't a man who cheated on his grieving wife. He was a lonely husband pushed to the edge. And people believed him. The divorce process became a battlefield almost immediately. Daniel fought over details that felt petty, like he was trying to reclaim control wherever he could. He even tried to lay claim to money my brother had left me. Inheritance meant to help me rebuild my life after losing him. That was when something inside me hardened for good. He wasn't just betraying me emotionally anymore. He was exploiting my grief. I stopped responding to his messages. I let my lawyer speak for me. For the first time in months, I chose silence. Not as avoidance, but as protection. Work suffered. I lost weight without meaning to. Some mornings, I stared at my closet, unable to decide what to wear, paralyzed by choices that used to be automatic. And yet, beneath the exhaustion, something else was forming. Resolve. I started therapy, not because Daniel asked me to, but because I needed a place where my grief didn't have to justify itself, where I didn't have to defend my pain or explain why betrayal on top of loss was unbearable. Slowly, I began to understand something crucial. This wasn't just about an affair. It was about abandonment. Daniel hadn't cheated because I grieved too much. He cheated because he couldn't sit with discomfort, mine or his own. And the more I saw that truth clearly, the less power his words had over me. Still, the worst was yet to come. Because just when I thought the damage had peaked, when I believed I had already hit the lowest point, life showed me how much further it could fall. I didn't realize I had reached the bottom until I was already there. It wasn't the day I signed the initial divorce papers. It wasn't the day I found out Daniel had been lying about how long the affair lasted. It wasn't even the moment I heard he was telling people I had emotionally abused him by withdrawing after my brother's death. It was a quiet night, the kind of night where nothing dramatic happens, and that's exactly why it breaks you. I was alone in the house we had shared, surrounded by furniture that still carried the shape of a life that no longer existed. Michael's jacket hung on the back of a chair where I had placed it weeks ago, unable to move it. Daniel's side of the bed was empty, the sheets untouched, cold. I sat on the floor of the living room and realized something terrifying. I had lost my brother, I had lost my marriage, and I didn't know who I was without either of them. Grief has a way of stripping you down to the bones. Betrayal does the same. Together, they leave you exposed, raw in a way that feels unsafe. That night, I thought about all the what-ifs. What if I had tried harder to be present? What if I had forced myself to go out, to smile, to perform normalcy for Daniel's sake? What if my grief had been quieter, less inconvenient? The thoughts spiraled until I could barely breathe. I hated myself for even asking those questions, because somewhere inside me, I knew the truth. A loving partner doesn't demand you shrink your pain to make room for their comfort. Still, knowing something and feeling it are two very different things. I cried until my body hurt, until my chest felt bruised from the inside, until I whispered Michael's name out loud, again and again, like he might answer. He didn't. No one did. That was the night I accepted the reality I had been avoiding. There would be no reconciliation, no apology that fixed everything, no version of this story where Daniel suddenly became the man I needed him to be when it mattered. I had lost this marriage long before the affair. I just hadn't been ready to admit it. And in that acceptance, heavy, devastating, final, I hit the lowest point of my life. But sometimes, when there is nowhere left to fall, the only possible direction is forward. The shift didn't happen all at once. There was no moment where I woke up strong, healed, or fearless. It began quietly, almost invisibly, on a random afternoon when I realized I hadn't checked Daniel's social media in days. Not because I was forcing myself not to, but because I simply hadn't cared. That scared me at first. Then it steadied me. I started to see my grief differently, not as something shameful or inconvenient, but as proof of my capacity to love deeply. I hadn't broken because I was weak. I had broken because I cared. And that mattered. Therapy helped me untangle the guilt I'd been carrying. My counselor said something that lodged itself deep in my chest. Grief doesn't ruin relationships. It reveals which ones were already fragile. Once I heard that, everything clicked. Daniel hadn't cheated because I withdrew. He cheated because he needed constant validation and couldn't tolerate not being the center of my world. I stopped defending myself to people who wanted a simplified story. I let them believe whatever version made them comfortable. The truth didn't need my constant advocacy anymore. I poured my energy into honoring Michael instead. I volunteered at the cancer center where he had been treated. I spent time with his wife and kids, learning how to talk about him without collapsing. Keeping him alive in memory became grounding instead of painful. Then, unexpectedly, I ran into Olivia, an old friend from high school. We met at a coffee shop, both of us surprised and awkward at first. She had lost her mother to cancer years earlier. She didn't ask me to explain my grief. She didn't rush my healing. She just listened. What started as coffee turned into walks, conversations, quiet companionship that didn't demand anything from me. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen without being evaluated. When Daniel found out I was spending time with her, he spiraled. He accused me of hypocrisy, of moving on too fast, of doing exactly what he had done. The irony didn't escape me. I told him calmly once that I hadn't betrayed him. I had survived him. After that, I stopped engaging. And that was the real turning point. Not a confrontation, not revenge, not triumph. Detachment. I chose myself, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. And in doing so, I finally stepped out of the shadow of both my grief and my marriage. I didn't expose Daniel. I didn't confront his friends. I didn't correct every lie he told. I didn't campaign for sympathy or justice. I let time do what it always does. And slowly, the truth found its way back to him. The divorce finalized quietly. No dramatic courtroom moment, no speeches, just signatures on paper that officially ended something I had already mourned. Daniel, on the other hand, unraveled. The coworkers who had once defended him started distancing themselves when the pattern became clear, when they realized his lonely husband's story shifted depending on who he was talking to. Friends who had initially believed him grew uncomfortable with how obsessed he still was with my life. He showed up unannounced at my office once, crying, begging, saying he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. Security escorted him out. I didn't feel victorious. I felt done. Mutual friends stopped inviting him to gatherings after he caused scenes, after he couldn't stop talking about me, about how unfair everything was, about how he deserved another chance. People grow tired of stories that never evolve. His reputation eroded, not because I tore it down, but because he kept proving who he was. Meanwhile, my life began to settle into something quieter, something real. I moved out of the house we shared, not because I was running from memories, but because I was ready to create new ones. I painted the walls soft colors, bought furniture that felt like me, built routines that didn't revolve around anyone else's emotional needs. Daniel's family reached out once, carefully, not to ask me to reconcile, but to acknowledge that they had underestimated the damage he caused. That apology mattered more than I expected. When I finally ran into Daniel again, months later, he looked smaller, not physically, but emotionally, less certain, less entitled. He asked if there was ever a chance. I told him the truth. I needed you when my world fell apart. You chose yourself. That choice changed everything. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't justify myself. I didn't explain further. I didn't need to. And for the first time since my brother's death, I felt something I hadn't known I was missing. Peace. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. There were still mornings when grief pressed against my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. Evenings when memories of Daniel's betrayal whispered in the corners of my mind. But those moments no longer defined me. I learned to hold my grief without being consumed by it, to remember Michael without collapsing, to honor my past without being imprisoned by it. I rebuilt my life intentionally. I nurtured my relationships with people who mattered. Olivia, Michael's family, my close friends. I returned to routines I had neglected. Cooking became therapy. Walks became meditation. Photography and journaling became windows into a self I hadn't recognized while lost in betrayal. Most importantly, I focused on myself, not as someone who had been wronged, not as someone who needed revenge, but as someone who deserved stability, love, and peace. I realized the lessons were quiet, subtle, but profound. Trust is fragile. Once broken, it may never return, but respect for yourself can. Grief doesn't excuse betrayal, but it exposes true character. Healing requires action, not waiting. Seeking help, accepting support, reclaiming boundaries. These aren't signs of weakness, they are steps toward freedom. Children, like Michael's kids, like mine, absorb everything. Protecting them sometimes means making the hardest, bravest choices for stability and love. Looking back, I understand something I couldn't see in the fog of sorrow. Life will always test us, but the difference between survival and stagnation is how we choose to respond. I chose me. I chose clarity. I chose growth. And in choosing that, I found the capacity to love again. Carefully, wisely, fully. Not as someone who needed someone else to complete her, but as someone who had learned the strength she always possessed. I still remember the hurt. I still feel the loss. But I am no longer defined by it. I am reborn in my own life. And for the first time in years, the future feels wide open.